Consider the functions f and g. F of x equals x cubed minus 3x minus 3, and g of x equals the square root of x plus 1. What is the approximate solution to the equation f of x equals g of x? Use the graph as a starting point. Now, you can't see all the answers down below. Having some trouble with my internet right now, but I can work the problem out, and we will find the answer together. So I'm going to move over to my paper for the remainder of this video. It will not be short, but once again what it says is that f of x equals g of x. And if you think back to how we do these problems, if we fill in f of x, it's x cubed minus 3x minus 3, and it equals the square root of x plus 1. But in order to solve this problem, we want everything to be on the same side of the equal sign. So I'm going to move the square root of x plus 1 over. It doesn't matter. You could move what's on the right over to what's on the left over to the right, what's on the right over here to the left. It's not going to make any difference in terms of solving this problem for 3 iterations. You get x cubed minus 3x minus 3 minus the square root of x plus 1. And I'm going to just kind of outline that in red because that's what I'm always going to be referring back to. Again, I do not have the internet, but luckily I've worked this problem out ahead of time so I can keep going here. What we do is we can type this equation into Desmos, or we can type this equation into Desmos, either one, and what we're going to find out is that our answer is going to be between 2 and 3. So what that means is that our lower bound, which I'm going to abbreviate as LB, is 2, and our upper bound is going to be 3. Running out of ink apparently. So our upper bound is going to be 3. Our lower bound is 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to put 2 back into this equation, and we end up with 2 cubed minus 3 times 2 minus 3 minus the square root of 2 plus 1. And when we type that in, whether it's into Desmos, into a calculator, we end up with the value of negative 2.73. And if you've watched any of the iteration videos, we need to know that that value is negative. And not only are we going to put the lower bound back into this equation, we're also going to put the upper bound back into this equation. And we get 3 cubed minus 3 times 3 minus 3 minus the square root of 3 plus 1. And when we type that in, I believe that we get 13, which is a positive value. So the lower bound is linked to the negative number. The upper bound is linked to the positive number. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take the average of the bounds. So 2 plus 3 divided by 2 is 5 halves. We're going to take that value of 5 halves and we're going to put it back into that equation that I've got highlighted there in red. So this is going to be 5 halves cubed minus 3 times 5 halves minus 3 minus the square root of 5 halves plus 1. And when we type that in to our calculator into Desmos, we get 3.25, which is a positive value. And now what's going to happen, remember, the lower bound is linked to negative, the upper bound is linked to the positive, so our lower bound is going to remain the same. But our upper bound now is going to become 5 halves. And once we know that, we can find our first iteration, because what we're going to do is we're going to take 2 plus 5/2 divided by 2. And we end up with 9/4 when we type that in. And again, that is our first iteration. And now we're going to use that 9/4 to come up with our next value here. So we're going to put the 9/4 back into the red equation. So it's going to be 9/4 cubed minus 3 times 9/4 minus 3 minus 9/4, the square root of 9/4 plus 1. When I type that in, I ended up with negative 0.162. Again, the most important piece there is that that's negative. And the lower bound is linked with negative, the upper bound is linked with positive. So now we're going to have a new lower bound. So our lower bound is now going to be 9/4, which comes from here. And then our upper bound is going to remain the 5/2. And let's see if I can keep this on one page. I'm not sure I can, but we're going to take 9/4 plus 5/2 divided by 2. We're taking the two bounds and we're averaging them together. And when we do that, typing it into Desmos, if you're typing it into Desmos, by the way, you really do want parentheses around that, but we get 19/8. So we're going to take that 19/8 and we're going to put it back into that equation that's boxed in red. And we get 19/8 cubed minus 3 times 19/8 minus 3 minus the square root of 19/8 plus 1. When we type that in, we get 1.43, which happens to be a positive value. And again, our bounds. Our lower bound is linked to negative, our upper bound is linked to positive, so our upper bound is going to change, so the lower bound is going to remain 9/4, and our upper bound is going to become now 19/8. And then we can finish this problem because we're going to take the average of those two values, the 9/4 plus the 19/8 divided by 2, and when we type that in, we end up with 37/16. That is our third iteration, and that is also the answer that we want for Edmentum.